I'm Ricky Matthews, president and publisher of the Sun Herald, and Stan.
I'm Stan Tyner, the executive editor.
We're going to just briefly talk about the first week or two of coverage of the Sun Herald. I think the best place to start is you look at the first edition after the hurricane with the headline, Our Tsunami, is what actually led to that particular paper. That was an important time. This was Tuesday's paper. Of course, the hurricane hit on Monday. On Saturday, even before Saturday, frankly, but on Saturday we made some important decisions to send some key editors and designers to our sister newspaper in Columbus, Georgia, and their families, I might add. We asked for volunteers. We allowed them an opportunity to find safe shelter and to pre-position them to be able to be in a position to cover the storm from there. What we actually told them was if they could not communicate with us, to do the best they could to print the Tuesday paper based on AP and other reports, and then print 20,000 and truck them down. And when we got them here, we'd figure out what to do with them.
Going back to that Saturday, we had a newsroom meeting. We had been observing, as everyone here, with great attention placed on what was happening in the Gulf of Mexico. And we recognized that Katrina was going to be a very significant event in the history of our region. So Ricky and myself gathered the newsroom staff together for, I think, probably one of the more important newsroom meetings that we've had, and talked about what we would do. As he talked about the pre-positioning and so forth, but in speaking to the rest of the staff, expressing a strong need for them to get to a place for personal safety reasons. And then we got the Sunday newspaper out Saturday afternoon and early, and then I got it on the regular edition. And then for the Monday paper, we had a Sunday afternoon press run, and the headline on that edition is somewhat haunting now as we think back on it, but in rather large type it asked the question, "Another Camille?"
Yeah, little did we know what we were going to experience at that time. We knew it was going to be bad, but I don't think anyone in our community expected something as widespread and devastating as Hurricane Katrina. As I watched, I actually stayed at my house. We had a small group of employees who stayed at the Sun Herald building. As I watched the water rise on my house on Back Bay, it became very clear to me that what we were going to experience was something unlike I think very few of us realized we would encounter. Although there was some good evidence out there in various weather blogs, etc., that what we were about to experience in terms of storm surge was unlike anything anyone has ever seen before, which led to Katrina hitting and unfortunately too many not making it. We've said oftentimes if this would have been a daytime storm, a nighttime storm, excuse me, that there is no telling how many people would have been killed, because there are thousands and thousands of stories of people being rescued from the water.
As soon as the storm had more or less passed, most people sort of came out of their places of abode and got their chainsaws out and started trying to get to someplace. And in the case of newsroom folks, which it was getting back to the newspaper, I live in Orange Grove, and actually a police officer came in and told us, because we had very little means of communication at that time, was the first evidence that I had heard. He said it's devastating. The beach is destroyed, the coast is destroyed, and he enumerated some of the places that he had heard had been destroyed, and he included the Red Lobster and the Olive Garden. And I said, "What about the newspaper?" And he said, I just don't know about the newspaper. These are the things I know about." So until I got here, I didn't know whether there would be a newspaper standing. As you know, here at WLOX and at the Sun Herald, we're awfully close to the beach, but fortunately on the north side of the track. So it was a relief to see the building was standing. There were reporters already working on the story, and very shortly thereafter, people from Knight Ridder came in from Montgomery that had also been pre-positioned, and they brought satellite phones and other means to help us communicate. That evening, Mayor Holloway and Vincent Creel came into the newspaper, which was dark. We had a generator with some lights on, but generally the building was dark, and the mayor came in and began to tell us about the devastation in Biloxi, and he said it was our tsunami, and that was our headline in the Tuesday edition.
So we got that paper out. It was 20,000 copies. We distributed it everywhere we could, and we got cranking for the next day's edition.
The story was so enormous that it was, the devastation was everywhere, and there was a lot to try and report on. And photographers were out. We had people far and wide that we were not able to communicate with. Fortunately, David Purdy, who was in Florida and had no means of communicating, just made a decision and got a plane and went up and got some marvelous aerial photos, which became an important part of the storytelling. But our second day's edition after the tsunami headline was Hope Amid Ruin. That was sort of counter to what a lot of papers were doing, but in the photograph that we had, it was a wonderful moment when a mother and son who had been separated, and the mother thought the son was dead. Literally at the moment that they were reunited, our photographer was able to capture that scene, and we thought even though it was a moment when we were fearing that there was a terrible death toll, we were able to point up the fact that there were some hopeful signs that were being discovered across the coast, because as you know, we could have written stories for months about the great loss that we suffered.
And just one other point that I'd like to make is that there was so much hope amid ruin, and the reason we had hope amid ruin is that people were saving each other. And it comes back to the fact that this was a daytime storm. Thousands of people were swimming for safety and diving out of their houses, getting washed out of their houses, hanging on the trees. And people all over South Mississippi were helping each other survive. And that is a story in and of itself. And I think as a result, the Hope Amid Ruin headline really tells the story about as best as it can be told on that second day.
I think there was a sense that frustration was beginning to really be reflected in what was going on. We were now into Tuesday and Wednesday had passed, so we were hearing from people across South Mississippi that the services that were needed, and they were so widespread and they were so desperate, were simply not being met. So one of the things I think we believe that a newspaper does is reflect the voice of the community. So that headline saying "Help Us Now" really was a voice coming out of the ruins, and this particular front page was held up on almost every evening newscast across America that night, and I think indeed was heard far beyond South Mississippi's borders.
Well, what was so important for us as we reflected, the fact that we didn't have communication in South Mississippi was extremely frustrating. We couldn't communicate outside of face-to-face contact. Around the second or third day is when I came across the WLOX and talked with Dave Vincent and Leon Long, and we agreed that we would join forces the best that we could. They had a ham radio operator here at the WLOX that we actually used to get messages out. But the best we had at that stage was the Pony Express, where we actually would send people out and have them send messages to community leaders or emergency people, and we would get our messages out that way. But because of that communication problem, it was so difficult for all the pre-positioned supplies and help to get where it needed to go. And we frankly had come to the conclusion that it was an overwhelming disaster. It was a monumental disaster, and it was going to require an aid effort of monumental proportions, which was not pre-positioned. I don't think anyone could have anticipated that. So there was a lot of frustration, and we expressed that in the headline that day.
We were also moving quickly to bring the newspaper to more and more people. Through the first month, the Sun Herald didn't charge for the newspaper, but we ramped up the circulation from the first day of 20,000 to over 80,000, which was the largest circulation in the history of this newspaper. And reporters, newspaper carriers, ad salesmen, anyone who could put newspapers in their car and carry it to a point and take bundles with them and pass out as they went from place to place was the means of delivery, going to shelters and so forth. And it was extremely gratifying as a news person to see the response of people who recognized how important the paper was in terms of carrying a message, because there were a lot of people who had no electricity or no radio or television, no other way to get that information.
Well, we knew that because people didn't have the power, et cetera, that our number one objective had to be to get information to readers, to whoever the readers are, wherever they are, as quickly and as regularly as we could, because that might be the only way they would know what was going on. So by Friday, we had the Bush visit that was going to happen. Help was beginning to trickle in, and we saw the fact that agencies were overwhelmed, and we began to cover that story as best we could from a relief response point of view.
And the president, I don't think in the more than 5 years I've been editor of the Sun Herald that we've had a president or vice president in town. That was about to change with Katrina. The president and the vice president and the first lady and a succession of cabinet members came to see for themselves the plight of this community. I thought this was a terrific photograph that led the page that day. The president's pledge, "We'll clean this mess up," and these tearful young ladies who were expressing the pain that so many in our region felt captured, I think, very well the president's trip here and many that would follow.
By Sunday, we were all focused, not only inside our buildings, but in the community, about the issues of disease. We were at the Sun Herald building, for example. We had wash stations outside where people washed their feet or their shoes and their hands, and we were really concerned about the issue of sewage leaking into areas where people were, about decaying, either whether it be bodies or contents of people's freezers. The issue in Gulfport specifically with the million chickens and all of that, there were some significant concerns about the health threats that were potentially could emanate from this disaster.
And the health threat headline, I think, captured that, and the photograph of these children being removed from a shelter where there had been an outbreak of dysentery was an image I think we'll remember for a while about what that moment in time was like.
Well, Sunday was also a significant day because at the Sun Herald that day, helped Haley put together a meeting. We had several community leaders, including Leon Long and Dave Vincent and Anthony Topazzi and George Slogel. Mayor A.J. Holloway and Brent Warr also attended, and we talked about, now that we're in a search and rescue mode, what do we do? How do we think about the future? From there, Haley went on a mission to form the Governor's Commission on Recovery, Rebuilding, and Renewal. But this was the Sunday following the hurricane when we started those meetings.
Well, the slow progress, I think we all have felt that, and these weary workers, their expression told it a lot. But there was a lot of things that were you were beginning to get a sense too that maybe it was slow, but there were people coming. That a lot of I was particularly taken by the faith-based groups and so many who came from distant places. There was just an outpouring of concern and love for our region that I think we felt, but it took a while to for everybody to get here. So the ones that were on the scene were working around the clock trying to find if there was anybody that needed rescuing, and of course by this point in this terrible heat and so forth, it was made even more difficult. And we just, when I think the secondary had flawed plans, didn't account for storms worse than Camille. By that point, we all were beginning to recognize that our sense of Camille being the biggest thing that could happen had been eclipsed so many times by Katrina.
And the other point is that everything that Stan said is true, and then when you account for the reality that we were in a search and rescue mode, people had to evacuate into their attics. They had to swim to the top of trees. They were in boats. They were literally all over the place. And when you consider this debris line, that it literally encompassed our entire Mississippi coastline, the search and rescue effort that was helped by search and rescue teams from all over the United States was a massive effort. And as a result of the rescue workers being so focused on finding people, which they continue to find people alive for days following the storm, some of the basic needs like food and water, will eventually trickle in, but the search and rescue scene took major priority over everything else. That's why slow progress was felt by most South Mississippians.
Well, in looking at the digging out photo, I can see these scenes in my mind, and I can see them to this day because there's still clumps of clothes that are lying here and there that, an abundance of clothing was sent down, and it almost overwhelmed us. But this particular scene of someone trying to find a piece of clothing is a poignant scene that was repeated across the coast, I think.
Yeah, and I think that the other point is that you did see some national media working very hard to politicize the situation, that certain political officials fail. And I think in reality what we saw was a disaster of monumental importance, and the plans didn't meet up with that. And as soon as I think people began to realize what we had here, help started coming from all over the place, not just from the federal government, not just from the state and local governments, but faith-based groups, churches from outside their area, nonprofits, communities, literally from all over America, were coming in here and meeting needs in just about any way you can imagine. It was an amazing part of this whole disaster to see the American spirit play out in South Mississippi.
Well, the American flag, even as we look across the coast now, you can drive up and down, and it's interesting how that was the symbol after Camille, and it came to be a symbol again that we're not defeated. I think that was the message that the flag represented, that there's so much patriotism here, and the inching back to normal began to capture some of that spirit. Coast buzzes as businesses reopen, people return. It didn't take much to represent progress in those days, that if they put up a stoplight on Pass Road that made traffic flow a little faster, when they opened the first hamburger place, that was progress, and we all sort of had a spirit of enthusiasm about seeing something getting back the way we were. And people here, of course, who were in a position to do so, like this lady here that's sweeping up her front steps, we do that very well in South Mississippi, is get back to normal.
Katrina's casualties. One of the things that we worried a lot about is, how many people died. There were a lot of rumors about the number of missing and the number of those who perished. And it wasn't until weeks after this, after we had an editorial board meeting with our coroner, Gary Hargrove, that we began to understand just how he managed that situation, which after meeting with him, we felt like he did a fairly good job. But there was a huge communication problem at this stage of the game still. There were rumors that thousands had been killed, and they wondered why they weren't letting us know, and letting the community, people wondered why the community wasn't being allowed to deal with this issue of the number of dead. The rumor was out there that only those that they could assign a name to were counting toward the numbers, that there were trucks full of body bags that they hadn't identified and hadn't counted. But we later learned that wasn't true. Big issue, though, was trying to get a handle on the number of dead.
there were a lot of casualty lists. There are missing lists that were being circulated, and we obtained one and published it in the newspaper, and discovered that my daughter-in-law, who was in our home throughout the storm, that she was listed as missing because her sister in Shreveport had tried to call, as you would expect, unable to do so, and she got on somebody's list, and Ricky's administrative assistant was also
Right.
on the list. So it gave us some way of understanding that the lists were not very thorough or accurate for that
Well, the
matter.
secondary story, because you'd never place this secondary story, which is one of the most important stories in South Mississippi, you'd never want to place that story ahead of the issue around casualties. But that would be the only reason this would be a secondary story. And it's this, here we are a week and a half after the storm, and leaders and executives and the governor and leaders throughout the state were focused on land-based casinos. What is the process we need to put in place to protect the casinos so they can get insurance, so they can reopen, so they can make quick commitments to get the 17,000 employees back to work as quickly as possible. And it's really amazing looking back now, thinking that here we are a week and a half out from the storm, and while we're still trying to get food and water to people, we're thinking about how to get people back to work as quickly as possible. That's the quickest way to get normalcy back to our community, and it's interesting to see that secondary story on that day's paper.
Well, our people were dispersed everywhere, and the picture of the little girl hugging the doll, there were families that were broken apart, and so we were recovering and rebuilding with a lot of uncertainty going on because communication was still scant. We didn't, for example, just within our newspaper family, it was well past the first 2 weeks before we were able to account for all of our staff. So we know that same sort of worry was existing across the coast, and even as we were having to get on with doing those things, we were talking about the family life, that people had moved to other places, and folks were really all over America, and many of them still are.
And that was evident by the amount of traffic that we had on our website. As people, there was obviously a lot of interest in the days following the storm on sunherald.com. But as time went on, those people who had left our area to either put their kids in schools in other areas or to get jobs in other areas, it's pretty clear to us that they've actually tried to stay in touch with what's happening here so they can figure out when they can come back home. Our sister newspapers, for example, in Columbus, Georgia, and Macon, Georgia, both reported that they had a number of people who had joined their churches and joined their schools, and the community had been welcoming them with open arms, and it was really creating some interesting challenges for those communities. If you multiply that time the number of cities throughout the South that were taking our South Mississippians in, so they could reestablish some life while they waited to see when they could get their feet back under them in South Mississippi. It's a pretty amazing story, actually.
Our colleagues in Macon, we sort of became Biloxi East because there were hundreds of citizens there. It would be hard to imagine that, but it was true. So once they recognized that, they put a notice on the front page of the Macon Ledger-Inquirer and told South Mississippians who wanted a copy of the Sun Herald they could come and get it, and indeed they did.
Yep.
Well, there's the story, that as people began to have to deal with red tape, the bureaucracy, the paperwork of getting the sort of things that they needed, we had a whole new lexicon that came up around services that FEMA and the Red Cross and Salvation Army were doing. We learned about getting blue roofs and how to get food stamps. We talk about, South Mississippians are very strong, proud people. One of the things that we say is we used to be opposed to handouts, and now we've learned to take them and appreciate them ourselves in so many ways. And this picture of frustration of this lady, the long hot wait, we all can now it's cool and we have air conditioning, but in those days nobody did, and standing in the sun waiting to get a piece of paper to fill out was a very frustrating experience. And I thought the razor wire going up was a moment in time that we will remember so well too.
And just in terms of long hot wait, one of the things that became very clear to me is that Katrina was an equal opportunity destroyer. It hit middle class, it hit the poor, it hit the rich, it hit everyone. And because it hit so many people outside the 100-year floodplain, middle income people who had all their equity in their homes and no insurance found themselves in a position where they had literally lost their life savings. So Katrina was a levelizer. It put all of us on an equal plane in so many different ways. And so the long, hot wait was because so many people were impacted, and so many people across all socioeconomic levels were impacted and had needs. And never before, probably in American history, we'd seen such widespread need in so many different ways. And thus, we had the long, hot wait.
There were a couple of things, I guess, that I reflect on in seeing that. The photograph, again, I think our photographers did a terrific job throughout this period of really sort of capturing the sense of what each day's story was. The Red Cross had a very big job to do. Again, they're like everybody else, and I think I've learned to have sympathy for the difficulties that so many people experienced, and I know there was a lot of frustration because at the newspaper we heard a great deal about it. You can't get through the phone line. It was just a massive overload of people trying to get through to get those, and the Red Cross, I know, has raised more than twice as much money as 9/11, which had been the previous high mark for charity in this country, and the sense of one person in despair being hugged by another we saw over and over again, and I know that the Red Cross took some heat, but I know they did a lot of good here as well. And so many people, this headline talks about the September 11th attacks, and people who were there were here again. I mean, there's some really caring and impressive people that came down that we met during these many weeks.
And a couple of things on that page that ring true to me. One is, first of all, the detailed look at the response by state and federal agencies after Hurricane Katrina by Knight Ridder. It reminds me that it was so terrific to be part of Knight Ridder. That company's core values, the fact that they care about their employees, they care about their communities, really came through in the days following Hurricane Katrina. We had, at one point, I said, well, how many Knight Ridder people do we have at the Sun Herald? And the answer was over 60, helping in every area of our company, not just on the news side, but in circulation and in production, helping with counseling of our employees that needed that kind of assistance. It was an amazing thing. And then at the bottom, this was the first day that we actually printed over 80,000 copies of the Sun Herald, distributing still free to all of the communities of South Mississippi.
This, you'll notice right away, this doesn't look like the other pages, and for those who have been Sun Herald readers for a while will know this is the way the Sun Herald looked before August the 30th. And we had a little, you'll see the top of the right column, getting back to the new normal. We actually discussed this a lot and felt like that it was important on the road to recovery that we create a sense that things were getting. We knew they were not going to get back to the real normal, but the new normal meant adding things back to the newspaper that we didn't have before. Prior to that, every word in the newspaper, other than the death of Chief Justice Rehnquist and something of that magnitude, would get into the Sun Herald. We added the buzz back. We added some sports. We got some television news back in the paper. So going back to the way we looked before and getting content that was like it used to be, we felt like it was important to readers. There's still going to be the main stories. Were still going to be something like missing persons, which was a very serious and important story, but the Sun Herald sort of went back to its old look and feel.
And since this is the last front page in this series, I just wanted to say that there's a part of us that's searching so hard to get back to normal, while there's so many of us in our communities that still are looking for where their next meal is going to come from. At the moment that we're talking about this today, too many people living in tents in South Mississippi. The good news is that South Mississippi has come together in ways we never thought we would be able to. I don't know that we could have done what we're doing today prior to Katrina, but I like to say there's a powerful lubrication that comes from pain, and pain has brought us together. And the communities that make up this diverse place we call South Mississippi, they're coming together in ways I would have never dreamed we could do. So as a result, we're focused on a rebuilding effort, and some exciting things are happening, and jobs are going to be coming back. And 3 or 4 years from now, we're going to look back, and South Mississippi is going to be prettier, bigger, better than we ever expected it would be. But along the way, we still got to manage in the pain of people still having needs, and hopefully the development of the jobs and the people who need jobs so they can get their lives back. Those 2 points will meet somewhere along the way, and will be much better. And I'd like to also mention that the opportunity to work with WLOX and the days following the storm, we were doing things behind the scenes, if we found a diesel fuel truck, then we would share the diesel fuel with WLOX, and they would do the same thing with us. And there was just a lot of working together in the kind of corporate spirit you would expect media outlets that typically are pretty competitive with each other. You would expect us and hope that we would work together in those kinds of ways. And we did that in the days following Katrina. And they were great partners. And it was either Dave Vincent or Leon Long or Don Moore and any number of others that we were constantly coming across the street, either us to WLOX or WLOX over to us, to see is there anything else we can do to help each other. That was an amazing time. And I hope that we continue to bring that corporate spirit for well into the future. And I think it's that's going to help South Mississippi recover faster.